Hello and welcome back to Tete by Fresco Media. We're here again for another episode in the build-up to the Indian Super League, which launches tomorrow on the 20th of November. And this is the third episode that we're going to be taking you into something that's a very interesting and a very relevant topic in this coming to this season because there have been quite a few new partnerships forged between European sides and Indian Super League sides. And I think this has a bit of history because when the ISL launched in 2014, there were a lot of clubs that used the resources and the technical know-how of a lot of European clubs to kind of set base and kind of give them a starter pack, if I may call it that way. But I think that it's carried on to a phase where these partnerships are very different in today's world. Each club has their own way of interpreting these partnerships because the European side sees it differently and the Indian side also sees it differently. And we're here to kind of put it into context and see where these partnerships can go, where it has gone in the past, and the verdict basically, because these are big moments in Indian football history. Joining us is Dibyadeep, back again for the third episode. And if you haven't listened to the first two episodes, I suggest you do that because this episode does, kind of move on from what the foundations we've laid in the first two. So Dibyadeep, how are you? And what is your first memory when it comes to a partnership between an Indian football club and a European football
I'm
club?
good, thanks, Shrez. But talking about the European presence or presence of a European club into Indian football, I think we in the past have seen Bayern Munich come here for a friendly, New York Cosmos many years before this, with Pele coming to India for again another friendly. But I think that trend has changed, and if I have to think about the first such partnership, I think it dates back to somewhere near 2002, 2004 when East Bengal had a partnership with Leicester City. And
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, how did that come about?
so in today's context, it's a marvelous thing if anybody is associated with Leicester City and how they have grown in leaps and bounds. But back then, Leicester City actually held East Bengal in very high regard. They saw them as one of the biggest clubs in Asia, who had a history, who has a legacy, and that needed to be respected. And so they had invited the East Bengal squad over to Leicester for an invitational preseason tournament, and they had faced teams like Mallorca. They narrowly lost the game against Leicester 1-0. East Bengal was led by Baijing Bhutia at that point in time. So the partnership is that such as that kind of gave the East Bengal team a very good exposure into what it feels like to play English Premier League sides. But it fell apart. It fell apart because Leicester got relegated from the Premier League, and somehow the Indian counterparts, the East Bengal officials, didn't understand what it meant to be in a partnership, in a willing partnership with Leicester City, and this did not work out. But tell me, what's your first memory of such a partnership?
I think it has to be closer to home. It has to be the Liverpool and DSK Shivajian's partnership, which is quite late if you consider that the first one came about in 2004. This particular one that I'm speaking about came about in 2013. And I can fully remember that Lalinzwala, Changte, and Jerry, who are both now playing at the top level and have played for India, they went for a couple of months of a trial at Liverpool. And it was a program that was trying to attract a lot of 15, 16-year-olds to kind of join the residential program, and I must say at a very exorbitant cost. But this was meant to be one of those typical soccer school programs for kids aged between 12 and 16, and kind of develop them to ensure that they probably get the exposure they deserve in Liverpool. But that's a very different one from the one you mentioned between Leicester and East Bengal. And another one that actually came up to my mind when we were going through the past partnerships was JCT and Wolves. And JCT is not a well-known club these days because of the fact that it disbanded around a decade ago. But I mean, back in the last couple of decades, turned it back to 2005, 2006, 2007. JCT are one of the best I-League sides in the country, along with Dempo and Mahindra United. And they forged a partnership with Wolves. I think this was an interesting one again, similar to the Leicester East Bengal one, where players would get an exposure trip to Wolves, and I think this is kind of motivated by the fact that Wolves have a Punjabi fan base back in Wolverhampton, and that kind of made the owners look at the Punjabi market and more specifically JCT to kind of encourage a bit of it's a matter of pride these partnerships. And I think it was, until this point, a matter of pride being associated with European clubs. But as we come on to discuss, the scenery has changed so much from that time that we're talking about more about development, youth development, about what each club can gain commercially, and whether the mix between commercial and youth development is right at this point in time. But I want to ask you, the FC Midtjylland and Dempo SC deal, 2011 it was, and Srinivas Dempo took a 34% stake in the Danish club. Was that a kind of a trailblazer, and do you think that that was kind of following up on Venky's takeover of Blackburn Rovers in 2010?
That was a new change in the trend, wasn't it? Because I think up until then, European clubs and Indian clubs were associating themselves as strategic partners or technical advisors to Indian clubs. I think investing into a foreign club was new, and something along the lines of what Venky's were doing with Blackburn, and a lot of Asian industrialists were doing with Premier League clubs. A lot of Southeast Asian industrialists were investing their money into Premier League clubs, and I think something on the similar lines is what Srinivasan Dempo wanted out of his investment into Midtjylland. But I think his personal business, his family business, didn't really work out. And I think one of the reasons, as we discussed before, is why Dempo themselves took themselves back from the I-League and started only playing the Goan Premier League. So didn't work out for him as much, did it?
I think the Dempo Midtjylland one reminds me of how Fosun, which owns Wolves at this present time, treats their partnership, or their ownership rather, with the club, because they try and send a lot of Chinese, 23, 24-year-olds to get a bit of exposure in England. And I'm not saying it doesn't help, but these players aren't going to make it to the first team unless something insane happens, something dramatic happens overnight. And I think that was kind of the thought process behind this particular investment, where, there's a two-way kind of gain out of this. Number one is obviously Midtjylland might be on the up in Europe, so you might benefit from being a stakeholder, but also you could give a lot of Indians a little bit of exposure in Europe, whether it's a 2-month training camp or whether it's a 6-month trial with the club or the youth academies, mixing it up. But I think that was a new one, and we haven't seen anything of that nature since, which is not surprising at all, considering that this failed, as well as Venky's takeover of Blackburn is still right up there in terms of one of the worst takeovers of all time. But I think this period, would you say, was a very uncertain period for foreign clubs looking at the Indian market? Because the ISL still hadn't begun before 2014. The I-League was in a precarious position, and for any foreign investors or European clubs, what was the scope like at that point in time?
I think the scope was very minimal, because the uncertainty of how the I-League clubs are going to survive, because how inconsistent they were in their operation, because you never know, the new clubs would come. The clubs who are really doing well, who just won the league, would shut up their operations. So investing into something as uncertain as what the I-League was at that point in time made it very difficult for foreign investors. And I think that that landscape changed with the onset of the ISL, because suddenly new franchises with no history were attracting clubs like Fiorentina and Feyenoord and Atletico Madrid. And that kind of changed the way foreign clubs looked at Indian football, because suddenly they thought and they saw that there's a lot of stardom associated with the ISL, which started off with fireworks and celebrities, and it was a marketing success, if you in a way, and which actually attracted clubs to come on board with these new franchisees and somehow make their presence felt into the Indian market. So tell me more about. I'm sure you have a good opinion about the Delhi Dynamos and the Feyenoord partnership.
Yeah, let's start off with that one then, because there are 3 ones that came about in 2014 that are worth talking about, and I think no better place to start than Feyenoord and Delhi Dynamos. They envisaged a way in which they would incorporate a Dutch style of football that would please fans, that would make them come to the stadium and watch their team play. And also they announced on the reveal date that they would try and play ethical football. To this day, I still don't understand what ethical football is, because I'm pretty sure if you play ethical football, I don't think you can win a game. But also, this partnership is a different one, because they started off well. Feyenoord helped them in recruitment of coaches, recruitment of background staff, and a few players in the draft as well. And from that point of view, it sounds all right. But then when you look at it, they had an orange jersey, which I honestly think is to kind of let the teammates spot each other in the Delhi smog. Apart from that, there was a fiasco because Delhi didn't even turn out to be a decent team, and the partnership broke off within a year. So that partnership kind of bemused me because it was too much talk and nothing to show on the pitch, nothing to show in terms of commitment from either Final to Delhi. And what are your thoughts on it? Because it's a very curious one.
I think all these the three partnerships that were very prominent at that time, the Atletico Madrid, Fiorentina, Pune, the Pune partnership and the Delhi partnership, they both were very similar on the same lines because they did not involve any, they did not have any monetary involvement in them. They had a share of.
But didn't Fiorentina have a 15% stake in Pune City?
Did it? But well, in that case, because I was reading upon them and they were very willing to share their facilities with Pune City. They said you can come up to Florence and use our training facilities. But what they were very adamant on, and I think what would have done a lot of good for Pune City and Indian football, is they clearly outrightly said, listen, we're not going to send our academy players to India right now because we are very unsure about how the Indian football is, what is their quality, and if this is going to be beneficial for our academy products, because we are the one who's investing in our academies. So, and I think that's one big place where the foreign clubs were very hesitant on, they weren't committed on, and which would have actually helped a lot in terms of how Indian football would have progressed. Because looking at the Atletico Madrid and ATK partnership, it again found a lot of limelight into the media because Atletico Madrid were doing really well in Europe at that point in time. And ATK traveled to Vicente Calderon to inaugurate the team, and they used a lot of their facilities, found a lot of Spanish teams willing to play against them for pre-season, and it looked very promising. But at the end of the day, I think the reason why these kind of partnerships fall apart is because, just like Sanjeev Goenka went on to say, that Atletico is not putting the money, and if they're not showing us the money, there's no benefit for ATK to be associated with them. And in return, what Atletico tried to get out of ATK is to promote their youth academies in the city, trying to promote their youth academies and attract young talent from in and around Bengal and the country. And I think this is where the imbalance strikes. I mean, can you think of some partnership that has recently been struck, which kind of has an exchange of coaches, players, or exchange of knowledge, which actually will do a lot of mutually benefiting the partnership?
I think the only one I can think about at this present time is the Chennai City and FC Basel partnership, which is, I don't think it's a partnership. You can't even call it that because FC Basel has taken up a significant stake in Chennai City. And, even the extent that the fans of FC Basel have protested regularly last year against this takeover because it involves a huge sum of money, and that shows the commitment that Basel have still stuck to that even with protests from fans. And we must also remember that in Europe, and especially in like Switzerland, Germany and Belgium, fans do have an ownership stake in the club, being members, and their voices do matter. It's not just simply a voice of frustration, so their votes do matter on this. And that seems to be a very promising venture because they're trying to bring in they're trying to encourage a lot of exchange, I would say, between Indian coaches, Swiss coaches, as well as youth academy players. Because for the longest time, right, all these partnerships have entailed, a maximum of 5 or 10 Indians getting exposure abroad. And FC Basel is trying to bring 50, 60, 70 Indian players at between the ages of 12 and 16 to go and play in Switzerland, playing age group tournaments in Switzerland, which is fantastic because that's what you need at this point. You need exchange of not just information, not just coaches, but you also need players to get equal and the right opportunities playing abroad. So that's the only one I can think of where there's actually a right amount of exchange of information. But that is a very different story because of the fact that Chennai City are still in the I-League. We don't know whether they're going to make the ISL. There are rumors that Chennai and Chennai City would merge into one ISL entity. And I'm not sure if I hope that will come true, because if Chennai City still remains the ISL, the I-League rather, and the merger eventually comes around, I could see them as a very, very good and successful second division side, manufacturing some of the best proteges for the Indian football team in the future.
In my opinion, if you really ask me, this is the kind of partnership that I see to be working out, and something very similar along the lines of Chennai City and Basel. And by the way, Basel's actually investing a lot into Chennai's training academy. I think they're in the process of their land acquisition into Chennai, where they want to set up a huge academy and get 40-50 players, young players, and try and develop them. Just not for Chennai City, but I think with an ambition that at one point they can take some players and take them back to Basel. And coming back to a very similar partnership, I think is the City Football Group and Mumbai City, if you consider that as one, because again these are football clubs or organizations who have ownership in football clubs, kind of putting their money where their mouth is, because they're investing it into Indian football. And like you said, what is very important is the exchange of players. And I think one of the biggest example is Adam Lafondre coming to Mumbai City this season, which is going to pump up competition, which is going to pump up the quality of the Indian leagues. And think about City Football Group, who not only have a say, and they don't not only run like City, Melbourne City, New York City, but they also have 9 other different clubs across the world. I think clubs in Japan, clubs in France, in Uruguay. So having somebody with so much of a reach to have a stake in your in an Indian club can do wonders if it's really worked out properly for Mumbai City. What do you think about the City Football Group coming to the ISL?
It's not just a commitment, is it? It's almost like they're taking the reins of the club. Now Mumbai is kind of an unearthed gem because of the fact that there is so much potential you can have through commercial ventures that can actually make Mumbai a force to be reckoned with. And we're already seeing, this season we've seen the signings they've made, and you can't argue for one bit that City Football Group hasn't played a part in these signings. Right from the coach Sergio Lobera, who is probably one of the most tried and tested and successful ISL coaches, who still hasn't won a title, of course, but one of the best, of course. Adam Lafondre, as you mentioned, they wouldn't have got that deal over the line without the help of the City Football Group. Their strategy is, again, play patient, unlike some of the other ventures we've seen fail over the past 5 or 6 years. And I think it will pay off. This is a historic moment. We even saw at the launch how special that moment was. So it has all the right inklings about it, and I really hope it comes true, because that's a huge moment for Indian football history.
So would you say the change in trend from clubs and European giants coming to Indian market just for commercial sake has changed into the European clubs coming and investing their money and looking for a long-term return? Has that changed? Because even now, even in the ISL, we see the partnership between Hyderabad and Borussia Dortmund, and it's part of Dortmund's collaboration with a lot of South Asian clubs that they've taken up at the same time, and somehow that kind of smells of just a commercial partnership rather than something that's going to develop youth football or football in general.
Yeah, I think the Dortmund one is a little bit of a commercially, leaning more towards the commercial side of things, because I guess it does make sense from the standpoint that Hyderabad FC has probably little to none of a fan base. And for them, their revenues, as it is, we spoke about in our previous podcast about how revenues are so dry in the ISL from top to bottom that you need to have some form of creativity when it comes to solutions. And I think Dortmund is going to help them a lot in that regard, especially going into this season where you don't even have ticket revenue or match day revenue. But on the other hand, when we talk about how it relates or stacks up in relation to the other partnerships we're going to come on to, like the Leipzig Goa or the Rangers BFC partnership, it does not smell good in terms of youth development and exchange of information between coaches. And that's what you need at this point in time. That's the need of the hour. I'd say that for Hyderabad, and as an exception, this deal does bode well for the near future, but might not do for for more than 3 or 4 years, because like we've seen, Dortmund have tried to extend their arms in Southeast Asia and it hasn't really paid off too much. and that does not give a very good picture and a good light on where Hyderabad is directed with this partnership.
I think absolutely this the Hyderabad Dortmund partnership doesn't really excite me as much. But again, talking about the exchange of coaches, exchange of players, giving the Indian players the exposure into Europe or into anywhere across the world would do them a lot of good. A partnership such as the Leipzig and FC Goa partnership, where Leipzig have come about and said that we're going to send our coaches when it's possible. We're going to take players from Goa, train them, give them the chance to have an experience of how it is in the Leipzig setup, and something along these lines that has kind of evaded the limelight for a long time. And I think this is something that should be spoken about, is the Sheffield United being a very crucial partner with the Tata Football Academy. And they have been in partnership for the longest time, and coaches fly down to Jamshedpur on a yearly basis. They train the players in the Tata Football Academy. They set up training modules for the other coaches to follow, and they take players on an annual basis to Sheffield for a period of time. And somehow, somewhere there, I think that is one of the reasons why Atletico is again very interested into investing into Jamshedpur, and which is and they have sent Sergio Castel last season to Jamshedpur, which really worked out wonders until he got injured. So, what do you say is the right balance between European clubs somehow finding their feet in Indian market, and somehow for the Indian clubs to be benefiting from this?
I think it's very relative, the amount of balance that they would probably impose between the commercial side of things and development as a club, because as the clubs are already 4 or 5 years old, they're only 3 years old in this longer league format, which requires a lot more focus, I'd say, rather than the 3-month IPL style tournament where you don't really need too much of a background staff, I'd say. And I think the Leipzig Goa one, that is very, very interesting, because RB Leipzig themselves launched only 10 years ago. Red Bull have a vast interest across the world in terms of ownership of football clubs. They're saying that they're not going to take over FC Goa and brand it Red Bull Goa. I can see that happening, to be honest. But I think this is Red Bull trying to dip their toes into the Indian market. There's a big potential here. They've just seen their rivals Borussia Dortmund entering the market, and they've struck a completely different deal from what Red Bull have done with FC Goa or RB Leipzig, I must say. So I think it depends from club to club. When I look at FC Goa, I see a hotbed for Indian youngsters. There's a rich tradition and history associated with Indian football. And FC Goa themselves have done very well in the ISL. On the other hand, you look at Hyderabad FC, who only launched a year ago, who are struggling to pay their players even at some point in time. They're going through all kinds of hardships. They need commercial support. They have Borussia Dortmund. And then I look at a mix of the two. I think the mix of the two is Bengaluru FC and Rangers, who struck it in 2019. And I think the one big move that has happened through this partnership is Bala Devi, an Indian women's football star, getting the move to Rangers, which was facilitated by BFC having good ties with Rangers. And that probably would escape the limelight at this point in time, but that again shows what a partnership can do to Indian football. Bengaluru FC stands to gain commercially, of course, through Rangers, and both teams again are on a similar trajectory, I'd say. They're almost like teams that don't have the A-listers in terms of the talent or the names, but they always keep chipping away and try to get better and better and better. And that way I see them as a very good fit. So I think it is very relative, Atletico Madrid and ATK was destined to fail because of the fact that the ideologies were so different. We saw that within a year that they couldn't communicate even. So it is very, very relative.
Doesn't it remind you of theory of comparative advantage between that Daniel Ricciardo had said in college?
Careful that we don't want too much economics in this.
No, but again, I think the way forward and no disrespect to Rangers, but I think Indian clubs should be looking to partner with European clubs that are not the financial the financial biggest clubs in Europe, because I think if you partner up with the Manchester United, the Barcelonas, and the Real Madrids, I think these clubs are not in the desperate need for commercial avenues to open up in the Indian market. I think they earn a lot of money. They're not desperate for it.
I think it's mutual benefits, right? You want each club involved in the relationship to benefit mutually and also work to have that same hunger and desire as the other one. That's where I see RB Leipzig and Rangers having equal or the same amount of hunger, because these are not clubs that already have an established fan base, that have so many other avenues to focus on, that they would turn a blind eye to an Indian club. And that's where I see, we're going to speak about how these clubs are going to go into the season even in the next podcast. And each team has their own different mindset going to this. And if there's any form of help from a European team, in terms of preparation, in terms of nutrition or whatever it is that can help them perform on the pitch this season, it could help them so much going forward. Then the commercial kind of becomes a second priority for these clubs, and that will just happen with a bit more time.
Absolutely, I agree. I think partnerships such as FC Goa, Leipzig, Basel, Chennai City, they kind of excite us for what is in store in the future for these clubs, because if you associate yourself with clubs which have a famed academy, you can have a back and forth with your players and coaches, sharing of knowledge. I think when coaches come here, and this is something that's a real problem in India, and I think that has changed with the AFC licensing that we spoke about before, about the coaches being having an AFCA license to have the authority to take over a team playing in the top flight. I think concepts like playing in half spaces, playing in zone 14 were very alien to coaches who don't have that education, and that's very important when you have an exchange of knowledge in that way. So I think collaborations such as these collaborations like I mentioned, Chennai City, Basel, they excite us for what's in store. But again, if it's too commercially immersed, I think they're destined to fail in a way.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap up on this edition and this episode of our ISL Build-Up. Don't forget to go ahead and listen to episode 1 and 2, because I think you learn a lot more from those before coming to this. That'll give you kind of a context into where we're heading in terms of our thoughts on what the ISL is going to be like this season. Thank you for your time, and if you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe and like our video. If you're on Spotify, make sure that you follow us to keep up to date with every episode that we release. We'll have a weekly ISL review show every Wednesday, now that the ISL is starting tomorrow, and we hope that you'll be able to listen to us. So thank you for your time, and goodbye from us.